Our topic now is something that has been on the agenda of CAMCA for a long time, and however, right now, it's a very dynamic time with regard to transport connectivity in all its dimensions. The absolute centrality of this issue to all interests of this region is something we now recognize. This isn't one among many issues. This is the mother of all issues, if you will, affecting CAMCA region, and it's created by nature, by geography, by reality. It's not an option to pay attention to it or not. If we do, the region moves forward. If we don't, it doesn't. It's as simple as that. Not to address the issue of transport, connectivity, and trade is equivalent to driving with the brake on. Good luck. Now, we have a really good crew this morning, and before I introduce them, however, I want to encourage you to think about this in its full dimensions. This panel is a little biased in favor of the Caucasus and the Western exposure. We talked yesterday about the Southern exposure. We should be thinking about all four directions in the compass. And we need to. And we need to talk about the internal relationships. Can you get goods from here to there within CAMCA? Can you get communication, information, people from here to there within CAMCA? These are, in other words, let's think about this in a big sense, not just limit it to our immediate areas of expertise, because we have four speakers now who really are pros, who are really doing it. And I want to encourage them from the outset to think big and go way beyond their own immediate day-to-day experience. We're going to start with our old friend Matt Bryza, who is a former ambassador to Azerbaijan, who's active in business now, especially in the field of energy, and a board member of the Jamestown Foundation. Then we'll hear from Kaush Arha. He's a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council, was previously with USAID, where he had a very interesting role in the international area, and served also in Afghanistan. Poor man has both a PhD and a law degree. And then we're going to hear from Mamuka Murjikneli, Director General of the Batumi multimedial terminal in Georgia. This is a complex project. If we've all been to Batumi years ago, we met there. Maybe we'll come back and cause some trouble. This is a project, the fate of which has become much more complicated very recently, and indeed all Western links involving the Black Sea have become complicated. And then finally, we're going to hear from our old friend Yerali, a CAMCA network member from Kazakhstan, who was chairman of the Aktau Marine North Terminal and board member of Port of Aktau on the east side of the Caspian. This is, again, a very bold initiative by Kazakhstan. We're going to hear about it, but about a lot more, because for transport, for Kazakhstan, transport is the mother of all issues. Matt.
Thank you, Dr. Starr. Fred, you've been an inspiration of mine for decades. I confess I have a soft spot on my heart for the South Caucasus, but also for Central Asia. And I think back to my days on the NSC staff when in mid-September 2001, just after the attacks. I walked into my boss's office, Dan Freed, a lot of you know him. I opened the door, and standing there were none other than the National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, and President George W. Bush, just when I walked in the door. And NSA Rice said, "Oh, Mr. President, this is Matt." And I was thinking, yeah, I want to talk about the South Caucasus, how Haidar Aliyev, then President of Azerbaijan, had contacted us on September 12th and said, you've got this corridor of access to Afghanistan. But no, she said, well, he's the guy on Central Asia. And I said, yeah, but also South Caucasus. And then she said, yeah, but Central Asia. And that was a signal. We struggled with how to enhance the connectivity of Central Asia via the South Caucasus to the transatlantic community. And we were really looking at the OSCE as a tool to do that. I think that map up there, yeah, it shows, you know, the traditional way over the years we've hoped there'd be evolution of Central Asia, including trade connections with China, then across the Caspian, through Azerbaijan, Georgia, and into Europe. And then a couple months later, Condoleezza Rice said to me, you know what, I think we're going about this all wrong. Central Asia is Asian. So we ought to be focused on helping to maximize the connectivity of the Central Asian states, not just with us in the West, but with Asia, and with the ports to the south, and with South Asia. And so that led to the reorganization of the State Department, so that I mean, this is just a bureaucratic detail, but that the bureau that oversees Central Asia was no longer the European one. It became South Asia. So it's now the Bureau of South and Central Asia. But we haven't done a great job at all in the US government in maintaining a strategic vision and then turning that vision into practicality to accomplish the sorts of multimodal, multi-directional connectivity that is important not only to Central Asia, but to all of us now, right? I mean, when you've got transit across Russia blocked, and I'll get into this in more detail in a moment, but as we said yesterday, transit across Russia blocked. What we're getting is huge bottlenecks in the South Caucasus, in Batumi, not only all across Georgia and Azerbaijan, with not enough rail cars, not enough locomotives. So whether it be oil tankers by rail or even trucks to move dry cargo, there's not enough. And so a normal 7-day journey from east side of the Caspian to Batumi is now going from up to 3 months. That's not sustainable, especially now when we so urgently need to unlock grain shipments and energy supplies to bring down prices and to make sure we avert a famine, right? And so we're not here today to talk about Ukraine, but Kazakhstan, as we'll hear about, is a huge grain producer. But at the moment, there aren't fast enough and economically attractive enough ways to get that grain to market, not only from the east to the west, but also from north to south, because organizing these routes is a very complex task. So we spent decades in the US government drawing lines on the map and thinking about how to move oil and gas. And I think we did a good job with our European allies and, of course, the countries of Central Asia, especially, well, really with Azerbaijan on the west side of the Caspian, Georgia, Turkey, and then our EU partners. We now have the Southern Corridor on natural gas. We have the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan. But we've been overly focused on energy. So I can't really see, but what we spent a lot of time thinking about was, yeah, these ports on both sides of the Caspian. Let's see, is that it? Yeah, how much oil can move from one side to the other, how much natural gas. That's very, very important. But what we did not do a good job in doing is thinking about multimodal transportation. It's easy to conceive of pipelines intellectually for non-experts, right? I mean, as people move up in any government, especially the US government, they get more responsibility, which means they're less expert on any topic. And pipelines capture the imagination. There seems to be an assumption, though, that road transit and dry cargo transit, those sorts of things take care of themselves. You know, golly, there are a lot of roads out there. Sure, certainly this must all be able to work together. So we haven't really focused on that. So what we really do need to do is what Dr. Starr has said. We need to look at, wait, coming. It's so hard to see. I don't really need these. Well, in any case, we need, to focus on these, there it is, the north-south routes. Easier said to Chabahar, to Gwadar, to Karachi. Yes, when the US catastrophically fled Afghanistan, a lot of these projects were put on hold. And so, as you described yesterday, compellingly, Dr. Starr, so much was underway, was ready sort of in the start house to get going, and that's all been set back right now. But there is something different now. There is something different. There is a recognition of this urgency to get the north-south routes going. and to do it in a commercially viable way. There are the basic building blocks of the infrastructure already put in place. They need to be linked. We need to, yes, develop the CASA 1000 project. There's the bridge over the Pyongyang River for road transport. And there are big players, big global logistics players like DP World, like MSC, that want to make this all happen. They see a lot of money to be made, and they also wish to be able to contribute to resolving some of these huge problems, the supply chain disruptions that could have catastrophic, deadly effects in Africa and around the world when it comes to food supplies. But it's so complicated to work through the policy challenges. So, okay, one of the routes we've been talking about goes on the western side of the Caspian, so down from Azerbaijan through Iran to Bandar Abbas or to Chabar. In theory, that ought to work, especially at a moment when maybe the Biden administration is hoping to restore the JCPOA, to convince Iran to return to it, and get the US back into the JCPOA. But those talks are going poorly. And it looks like they're not going to succeed at this point. Maybe Iran and the US are just posturing, and they're getting ready to finalize an agreement, but maybe not. So it would be great, it would be useful, recommendation to the Biden administration, even though this is an election year and the Republican side will be hammering Biden, and the Democrats are being soft on Iran, but to begin considering a policy that says cross-Iranian transport, whether it be for cargo from the north to the south and south to the north, or natural gas from Turkmenistan, which has the world's fourth largest reserves, much more of which can make it across Iran through swaps. So Turkmenistani gas to eastern Iran, Iranian gas up the western pipeline system into Azerbaijan and Turkey. Prepare to say that's okay, because we have an urgent need to get that Turkmenistani gas to Europe. The Russians are going to block a pipeline across the Caspian forever. The Iranians are too. So why not make a policy statement that transit across Iran is okay for dry cargo as well as for natural gas? Yes, I know the answer is domestic US politics, but this needs to be worked out. On the opposite side, as Dr. Starr was showing us, the north-south route that goes through Afghanistan through Pakistan, there have been some test cargoes, one set to Karachi in recent weeks. It worked. It was economically feasible. However, there are certain political and security challenges with regard to Afghanistan, but the biggest one, though, is maybe political. The biggest one is, can the US administration be seen as doing anything that provides some sort of economic benefit to the Taliban regime? But if we don't do that, what does that mean for those people that could potentially starve in Africa who need that grain from Kazakhstan as Ukraine remains bottled up? God willing, it will all reopen. So tough policy choices. But I think ultimately what needs to happen is the US needs to play the same convening role that it did for the East-West projects that I showed at the very beginning, especially the Baku-Supsa oil pipeline, the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan oil pipeline, the South Caucasus gas pipeline, which has become the Southern Corridor now, a EU-embraced project. None of that would have happened, certainly not BTC, certainly not the Southern Gas Corridor, had the US not been sitting at the table for 3 years in negotiations with the country's governments, so with the governments of Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey, with Turkey being really the teammate of the US in all this, and the companies. SOCAR, of course, TPAO, the Turkish National Oil Company, but BP. It was really BP and SOCAR that were the driving forces on the company side, and then the governments of Azerbaijan and Georgia that had to finalize a whole set of agreements that provided the legal and commercial framework for these pipeline projects to happen. It worked. It was difficult for Georgia to take on certain risks, but the companies demanded it, and they all found common language because the US was there to provide political cover and to provide negotiating forcefulness. So I hope that now this administration in Washington recognizes the urgency on a humanitarian basis, food security basis, energy security basis, and that it's good for the midterm elections if the Biden administration can say it's doing something concrete to get these precious goods to market, and then decides to play this convening role. And as an aside, I'm working like crazy on that for the rest of my stay here and when I go back to Istanbul. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Fred. Again, great to be here at CAMCA. Appreciate the offer. I won't go too much about in the actual dealings, but as you mentioned, the global connectivity, I'll posit some thought and then perhaps in Q&A we can talk about it. I'll start from where Secretary Guterres says, be a man, for that matter, a country or a region of its time. So I think I'll look at Central Asia in its time today. We can always harp about America and the rest of the world to focus on Central Asia and come up with a Central Asia or a CAMCA strategy. I think there are good people who continue to work on it, will continue to work on it. The chances of that happening as a standalone are always slim. We're sort of diverted in many ways. You can see that with Ukraine, we even have trouble trying to focus on our own Western Hemisphere. One of the most neglected places in our world is our own Southwestern Hemisphere. So then the question is, what is happening to the, as the book says, the topic says, both on the West and the South, and how the Central Asia or CAMCA region can make itself be relevant, associated with the big issues that are happening to its West and the South. So one, I think the word, and I posit a few thoughts and then we can have it. One, the idea of connectivity has taken a much more broader perspective than just trade and transport corridor like we first started this. So today, the word connectivity writ large relates to all physical and digital infrastructure. So I think that's important. So in America, we sometimes use it in a narrow concept, just internet connectivity, but it's the all digital and physical infrastructure. And so when we talk about CAMCA and how it fits into the West and the South, it's not just the trade and transport, but a very important part is what's the digital connections, and does it stand on its own or is dependent on North and exactly East on that end? I think that would be a very useful point to talk about it as well. The second is there's a concept of sort of trust in these connectivity technologies, both on the hard physical infrastructure and digital stuff, both that they meet the best industry standards, but that the governance, the rule of law or the political governing system that oversees this technologies that will provide this connectivity gives you an individual right of action. Is it somewhere where an individual can have some say, or is it primarily a state-controlled enterprise as it is both to the north and to the south? So these two themes are an important one as we talked about in trusted connectivity. So in the trusted connectivity, there are two major initiatives in the world, which is pretty much US and Europe is focused as their number one connectivity initiatives. For the Europeans, it's the Global Gateway, which was the US-Asia Connectivity Initiative, now turned into a Global Gateway, which has these 4 or 5 lines of effort: energy, digital, transportation, people to people, and few others. And that is what Ursula von der Leyen and EU's main strategy would be. It'd be the Team Europe. It'll be Europe working as one, addressing these connectivity issues. And then for us, from sort of American side of stuff, but Japan and America and Australia and India, is the free and open Indo-Pacific. That's our sort of large connectivity initiative. You just heard about the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, a very sort of rather pale substitute to the TPP, but nonetheless an effort to have these 13 countries working together. So CAMCA is pretty much in the middle of the free and open Indo-Pacific construct, which will take pretty much the bandwidth of American foreign policy on economic front for a long time. And the Global Gateway, which is pretty much the main economic play from the European aspect. So then the question, so how does CAMCA make itself both relevant so that when people are talking about FOIP or Global Gateway, you're not in a situation where you can ignore CAMCA. I love CAMCA, I'm here all, but the idea that we somehow want to come up with a CAMCA alone policy, we'll wait for that. But how does it make sure that it is, you can't talk about Global Gateway without talking about CAMCA. You cannot talk about FOIP without talking about. So that's the construct that you have in front of you. There are lots of technological solutions. There are lots of, I won't go into repeating the tremendous stuff on the north-south. But of all of these, the western side, the CAMCA and the West Corridor, is by far the most sort of developed and most fertile and promising to work on. On the north-south side of stuff, You have one on the India side, which is more talking about air links now, not limited somewhat in the physical connections. But it certainly would be worthwhile to discuss and see how that angle fits in as well. I'll stop there, not to go more other than in Q&A. If people are interested, one can go more on the specifics. So thank you very much, Fred.
Thank you. Sir.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. Many thanks for inviting me here. I'll speak about our company. I represent Wondernet Express Investment Group. We are the joint venture between American and Georgian firms. We are involved in logistics, basically bringing the goods from Central Asia to the Western market. We own biggest and most sophisticated terminal on the Black Sea in Batumi. We also own off-dock terminal in Poti, and we are in a negotiation process now to build the terminal in Aliat port as well. We are the biggest investors in Achara region, direct American investment. We are handling about up to 2 million tons per year. And as you know, with today's situation, what's happening in Ukraine, demand in our corridor is increasing dramatically. And definitely we are involved there as well, try to bring in fertilizers from Central Asia to the rest of the world. We are very happy to be the first ones that first time in last 30 years Turkmenistan was able to sell its urea directly to the big buyers from Black Sea. So they stopped selling their urea on a Caspian Sea and moved to the Black Sea already. We are working very closely, and we were the first ones who received fertilizers from Uzbekistan through our terminal. And we are planning to expand. We will be bringing more goods now from Kazakhstan, especially sulfur and other things as well. As Matt mentioned, Iran maybe will be open up, I don't know, in the nearest future. But we, for example, we don't see Iran as our competitor because we see in Iran is a big producer itself as well. So definitely they have their goods to transport. Plus, definitely they will take some goods as well from Central Asia. But I think Central Asia is becoming one of the biggest, and produced goods are increasing in Central Asia. And every year we see new and new factories opening up there. So definitely South Caucasus will become one of the most interesting route, and it will be fast, it will be cheapest, and it will be more interesting as well. In our case, I can say that it takes about 5 days for Turkmenistan to reach the goods to Batumi. From Uzbekistan, it takes about from 2 weeks to 3 weeks. It depends, what we are bringing. But again, of course, there is a limited capacity on a Georgian railroad and on Azerbaijan railroad, but they are trying to invest. And I think in next couple of years, we will reach up to 50 million tons, which will be a big number for a region. And definitely Georgia will get its historic place to be a gate between Central Asia and the rest of the world. Definitely, as I mentioned, this with the gas production increasing in Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, they need to, instead of selling just gas to the other markets, they started to invest in factories to build new fertilizer plants, and fertilizer market itself is increasing in the world, and there is a new demands every day. So we think that it was a very strategic and the right decision from American and Georgian partners to invest into the logistics in this corridor. And it took us about 2 years to build this terminal. Also pandemic hit and everything, but we did our best to have it running in 2 years, and we've been already 1 year operating, and since then we transported more than 500,000 tons already. So we are happy to receive more goods, and definitely we are planning to invest even more into the transportation infrastructure from our side. I'll be happy to answer the question, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Asad.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, after 24th of February, I mean, the global transportation and logistics have been disrupted, as you know. And for our countries where Russia has been the main transportation route for the global markets, I mean, 90% of oil and gas from Central Asia, all the goods, I mean, starting from grain, metals, and everything have been transported through Russia. I mean, Russia has been the main corridor which has been linking us with the global markets. And since that time, the middle corridor that have been discussing us so far became one of the most important agenda of all the Central Asian countries. So that middle corridor that have been discussing has been right now revived again. I mean, even though Kazakhstan has been substantially investing into this middle corridor agenda for the last 10 years, thanks to One Belt and One Road initiative with China. Kazakhstan has built the biggest dry port in the China-Kazakhstan border, Kyrgyz, and it has built 2 more terminals which can handle up to 10 million tons of cargo. This is the Port Kurik and the northern extension of the Aktau port. Also, Turkmenbashi port, Turkmenistan has built one of maybe the biggest port in the Caspian, the Turkmenbashi port, which can handle any type of goods and products. So all the countries have been working on that direction, but this new agenda that having all those transportation links, that existing transportation links, we have serious challenges on how to make this work. I mean, the main agenda comes right now within Azerbaijan, because as even Kazakhstan has the capacity to export the products into the global markets, Azerbaijan has serious infrastructure issues at the moment. They are unable to handle the volume of goods that we are sending to Azerbaijan. And later on, Georgia has also substantial problems in terms of the railway logistics. I mean, locomotives, the platforms, and the containers that can transport the goods from Azerbaijan and to ports of Batumi or Poti. Also, I mean, the serious issue also comes with the handling of dry cargo goods in Georgia. I mean, they're not, for example, if we go to we have been talking a lot about the grain. Kazakhstan has the opportunity to increase, even double the capacity of the grain production. But the main issue for Kazakhstan is the ability to export that grain to the global markets. And at the moment, as having the middle corridor as the only one alternative to the existing route, Azerbaijan or Georgia doesn't have the capacity of the silos, handling capacity of the amounts that can, let's say, Central Asian markets can produce and send to the global markets. So I think, all the countries have already started this TMTM agreement where the Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Georgia, all of them can cooperate and handle the goods. But the major agenda with the rolling stock infrastructure will be the key to link Central Asian countries with the global markets and revive the trade that has been in the few months ago.
Thank you very much. Any comments among you or questions that you would like to raise for each other?
I would, Fred. I'd like to ask Mamuka to comment on what we just heard. I mean, yeah, what you've done in Batumi is amazing. But there are these real limitations of rolling stock and even the track capacity and unloading. And I understand that just in the month of April alone, the volume of oil showing up at Batumi increased by 41%. So there's the tidal wave is upon you.
Yes, definitely.
What are the prospects for relieving it?
Definitely, it's a big increase, and I mentioned it as well. Like Georgian Railroad is investing now in itself to increase the capacities, and there is a shortage of locomotives. There is a shortage of rail cars as well. Like we ourselves are investing now into the rail cars for us to own our own, and we need about up to 500. And with today's sanctions, excuse me, we won't be able to buy them. Because the only country who is making them is Russia, hoppers. So basically you are stuck. You won't be able to bring them from US, you won't be able to bring them from Europe. So basically, like, you just sit and wait what's going to happen or buy it from someone else. But oil has increased. Other grain is a big issue, I know, and not all the terminals can handle the grain. But with grain, I can understand people who are investing into the infrastructure as well. Grain is something that it's like seasonal. And for a terminal, for someone to invest into the terminal just for grain, it economically will be not so good because it will be just for 2-3 months that they will be receiving the grain. So, and I know that Georgians are in Potis, they are trying to do something about this and to receive more grains. In regard of fertilizers, where we work ourselves, so far we've been we didn't have any issues in regard of the transportation. So we'll see. Future will show us, and definitely we need to work even more and invest even more into the infrastructure.
Just if I can follow up on that, what's the best case scenario in the near and the far term investment that would be needed to unblock these blockages both on the Azerbaijan side and on the, so if there was like a $1 billion, $5 billion, if they were allocated today, what could you possibly do in what time frame to address this? Or this is where we are at, and anything would address would probably be a 5-10 year horizon.
Biggest thing what needs to be done, and probably it should have been done yesterday, to build the deep sea port in Georgia.
Oh, yes.
That's the answer to all these questions. Deep sea port is something that we need.
This is not an abstract issue for CAMCA, because it turns out that the developers of both the Azeri port at Eilat, south of Baku, and of the new port in Kazakhstan are both former fellows. That's pretty exciting to think. You are as good a platform as exists anywhere for the discussion of these issues. Further questions for each other?
Well, just to related to this, I think earlier on we mentioned about CAMCA and Ukraine. I think lessons to be learned from Ukraine are useful. It's not that we inherently cared for Ukraine. Ukraine made it absolutely impossible for the West and the US not to care for Ukraine. And it's largely because of Ukrainian President Zelensky himself, but also the tremendous middle class that was in Ukraine that's fought and is fighting, and as a result, when you look at it, you couldn't do it. So this is a time when CAMCA can commit for same kind of stuff to say, you cannot afford to ignore us. There are two things, energy and food. I think there will be an agriculture second panel that can be used today to say, in this world of the time, you cannot ignore CAMCA because you're in an energy crisis and because you're in a food security crisis. But after saying that, the ability to deliver on it is related to these bottlenecks. So I think there needs to be a comprehensive point to say, can't ignore us, and this is the kind of investment we need to allow for us to play a role in addressing global energy and global food security issues. There's a dedicated time frame to talk about the food side of stuff, but that would be useful, but it has to have something more tangible as a proposal than an aspirational one, and whether deep sea port has been around for a while, so anyway.
I want to ask all four of you about the private sector. There are things happening there that we don't hear about. Within the last weeks, 100 tons of sugar were transported by India through Pakistan, through Afghanistan to Uzbekistan. Who would have thought this was possible? This took place totally private sector. Now, what's going on in the private sector outside of the government? Who cares? Who's doing what?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I had mentioned some of the maritime companies, the shipping companies that are desperately looking for ways to organize, not in a abstract, strategic way, but in a nuts and bolts, bottom line P&L way. How do you move all these sorts of goods? Yeah, how do you move them in multiple directions? And you have to have the multi-directionality, not just because we care and love CAMCA, but because that gives you leverage that you can use in your commercial negotiations for the other routes. So we need to have, or we do have companies, big shipping companies, and then smaller commodities trading companies, container shipping companies, that are working in a very practical way on getting individual cargoes, like the one you just mentioned, Fred, to ports, to then demonstrate the concept, and then to allow somebody to come in and organize, raise the financing for the infrastructure, but also financing for the trades. Because some of these cargoes, I mean, you need, $100 million to finance a trade, and if it's going to be for a cargo that transits the Taliban-controlled Afghanistan, wow, that's a big risk from a financial perspective. And so that's where you need to have this cooperation between governments and the private sector. But without the private sector, this will never work. It'll never happen. It's impossible.
What's happening in Kazakhstan, Asset, on the private sector side?
Well, the private sector, as I mentioned, the Russian route has been the main one. And at the moment, given that there is the only one opportunity is to move your goods and products with the middle corridor through Azerbaijan and Georgia, it became the key destination for the private sector.
Let me put my question a little differently to all of you. In terms of Central Asia, the Caucasus, are you going to be dependent upon international, or basically European logistics firms, or are there going to be serious ones from the region itself?
Well, definitely there will be some local players that are going to make a more active participation. I mean, there are still existing. I mean, at the moment, not only the government company which is operating the railways or any kind of transportation routes, most of them are private sector companies in general. I mean, the railways owns the infrastructure and of course, the major rolling stock, but the main operations are with the private sector, and they are the guys who are making the trade, import and export working today.
Are they making money?
Of course.
Good. Questions? I had one yes, right here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Starr. My name is Uluk. I'm from the Kyrgyz Republic, one of the landlocked countries. We are the only railroad we have is basically through Kazakhstan. For the last 20 years, we've been talking of building railroad with China and to Uzbekistan. But there's external factors that were impacting on that. We were not allowed, basically, to build that railroad. Hopefully, the current president will be able to move that process. And we will talk about this. For us, I think the first case was when we had revolutions. Our brothers, Kazakhstan, they were blocking the borders. So basically, we felt that situation of need for alternative routes in those cases. Pandemic was another one when we were all exposed to the vulnerability of logistics when borders were closed again. Now with the Ukraine, I think it's become a global issue as well as during the pandemic. So in this sort of a concept that the framework we're discussing, our companies now, and when you said, Dr. Starr, about private sector, they founding routes on their own through Iran. So we're not waiting for the US to get an agreement with Iran. We're doing it the business now already. We're moving goods from Turkey through Iran, through Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and to Kyrgyz Republic.
Bypassing the Caucasus.
Bypassing Kazakhstan, bypassing Russia.
Bypassing the Caucasus.
Yes. And I think this is one of the also prospective routes, not because it's not a competitive, but it's also a leverage for countries like us not to be dependent, because we've been exposed to a situation where Kazakhstan would close the borders for several weeks. and the goods would have difficulty to pass. And so, we're just hoping that the railroad from China to Kyrgyz Republic, and the stripe that they need to build in Kyrgyzstan is only 400 kilometers. And that, would be a very competitive as well route, because Kazakhstan has 2 borders, 2 passage of railroad. We don't have any. But we have very efficient automobile road. We move a lot of goods by, trucks. And we've been pretty successful in this. There was a green corridor between China and Uzbekistan through Kyrgyz Republic. And we're just hoping that this railroad will be built as well, because we are vulnerable.
I know there's a lot of enthusiasm for this railroad in Uzbekistan and as well as in Kyrgyzstan. However, it is basically serves the east-west. It's not directly relevant to the north-south route.
Yeah, but do you think if the Iran will be, if we come to the agreement, that's what I was going to ask question, would it be irrelevant then, a case where it would go through Iran to Turkey and then to Europe?
Well, that's the east-west route. Are the Caucasus going to be competitive on the east-west route as opposed to a route through Iran?
I think you were asking about the north-south route, though, via Iran. Yeah. And right now, the east-west route through the Caucasus is a mess, right? And Mamuka, when you say the only supply source of the rail cars is Russia, that's kind of chilling. So hopefully this will all work out. But the north-south route, my point is not that you need the United States to make that work. You need the United States not to block it, right? And so if the JCPOA collapses, the Republicans are going to push for a return to the massive pressure on Iran policy. So I'm advocating that maybe we should try to freeze that issue for the sake of avoiding famine and helping the global economy stabilize, and not use that issue, transit across Iran, as a geopolitical football. And one more geopolitical point, while I have the floor, I may not get it again, is imagine if these north-south routes work and Kazakhstan is no longer so dependent on Russia, and the investments happen. These investments happen for the north-south routes and the east-west routes, and the trans-Caucasian routes work. Geostrategically, what does that mean for Russia? These routes are going to be economically efficient and are going to compete then forever with what was a Russian transit monopoly. That is a huge potential bit of leverage that the international community has on Russia. Thank you.
Yes, please. And then back here. Here and then in the back.
I think it's off. It's on? Excellent. So this question is a little bit out of the scope, but this question is for you, Ambassador. So I was raised in Philly, but I was born in Uzbekistan. I enjoy my cheesesteaks and pretzels and Eagles, but I also like my dry fruits and all the ethnic foods that we import from Central Asia, whether it would be Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. So now we're talking CAMCA, the importance of Central Asia. Beautiful. Love it. Let's do it. A lot of people are moving in. A lot of people are immigrating. Excellent. As a techie, as an entrepreneur, one day I was just sitting there, I was like, how can I connect these dots and build the bridges? So I have an excuse to travel to Uzbekistan as often as possible. So I started doing, coming out with all these business ideas. It's been 3 years, imports, exports business, mainly ethnic foods. And, we penetrated the ethnic market, east of US, great, beautiful.
Your question.
Huh?
Your question.
Oh, I'm getting there. Sorry, I had to build it up. Great, ethnic stores, beautiful. But we got to try to enter, like, let's say Costco, right? Bigger players. And as an entrepreneur, I got to leverage every tool that I have under my sleeve. So we're talking Central Asia, Asia. But did you know that on the federal government, these countries are not recognized as Asians? So we are considered as Caucasians. So I was trying to apply to a minority-owned business certificate, so I can enter these programs and use that, in my, as a strong point, because I'm a new guy and a player. I'm trying to stimulate this trade, but the guys are telling me, sorry, you're not Asian. You can't apply for this.
Can we have a response?
Yeah, well, that's a mistake. I said, I don't know what's actually happening, if that's true. Maybe someone was talking to you who doesn't know what they're talking about. But I explained how we reorganized the way we look at Central Asia, right? That was like one of my core points. We reorganized that in the early 2000s to focus on Central Asia's Asian character and to reorient our strategic thinking toward the Arabian Sea and then toward Eastern Asia. So it sounds like there's a bureaucratic glitch, and let's fix it. And we could talk about it afterward.
Kaush, do you know about this?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure about the explicit point, but yes, I've been government, but yeah, it is Asian. Everybody in your position applies for Asian, and they get qualified. So I don't know what exactly happened. We do have 4 or 5 categories. There's also another category, but most people in America, particularly, you define who you are. So if you said I'm Asian, there's no government guy is going to come and tell you, I don't think you're Asian, you're Caucasian.
Back,
we can take
please.
it offline, but I'm not aware of it. I don't think that happens.
Thank you. In back, please. Sorry.
Thank you for giving me the floor. I have a quick question, especially for the second speaker and all speakers. Of course, we spoke about infrastructure bottlenecks, about these disruptions, severe disruptions. And I guess there is not that much we can do with this middle corridor, the absorption capacity is quite low. But my question is about the governance aspects of the connectivity. This people to people, business to business, experts to experts. We all know that what we can do is actually can reduce all these kind of barriers to reduce the costs of border crossing and to increase the speed of crossing. And we all know that Central Asia, unfortunately, trades with the rest of the world much more significantly than internally, because there are significant barriers to border crossing. There is this customs clearance issues. There is kind of trade, non-trade barriers issues. They all need to be solved. And how I think we need to think about this. And my question is that probably it's time to kind of look at these customs and trades reforms to improve the connectivity, to improve the border crossing. That kind of aspects probably needs to be looked at. And also, what about the open air kind of policy, which also have a lot to do with this? We spoke a lot about this yesterday, and it has to do with the governance aspects and kind of allowing the kind of cheap airlines to fly in and fly out, using the possibility of Central Asia as a hub for open air connectivity connecting Russia, and there are lots of kind of unresolved, unexplored potential, I think, as well here.
But thank you. Who would like? Yes, Kaush?
So, yeah, I mean, I think, once again, as Fred mentioned, one to think about the connectivity writ large. And in people-to-people connectivity that you're talking about, it is the highest potential and I think the lowest sort of interest paid thus far. So again, what the interest is here, I mean, CAMCA is a living sort of proof of this. But relative to China and relative to Russia, as we talked about Asia, the beauty of CAMCA is that in CAMCA region, you have a lot more a freer world. I mean, both relative speaking, both from internet to news media to whatever. So all the guys here are more aware of what's going on east and west than oftentimes folks in Russia and in China, just given the situation where we are at. So that's an important element, and that can be built up remarkably with tourism potential, both from Europe to Central Asia and certainly from India to Central Asia, which has been a huge issue. Mm-hmm. And that goes to the heart of your air links. So I think the biggest sort of barrier to that would be just the ability to get there quickly and then come out of it. And I think that is something can be done a lot quicker than building deep sea ports and trains and others, which obviously are very important. But this people-to-people part, the closer you make it, more difficult it will be to ignore CAMCA, as I said, in all these biggest. So I think that's the highest potential to do that.
We have a wonderful, I wish we had more time for questions, but we have a very impressive panel here, and I want to ask each of them very briefly, if you have any final comments you want to offer.
Fred, I don't. I gave mine when I grabbed the floor last time about the strategic leverage that we potentially have if we make these things work. I guess I do have one comment answering your question, sir. The people-to-people also needs to be business-to-business, because that's where all the regulatory changes and the customs changes are going to get political pressure generated, right, and make it worthwhile for governments to get together. But ultimately, I still think you need a convener to keep everything held all together as all these things are negotiated.
I'll just build on people to say, digital connectivity in all the world that you heard from the Commerce Secretary Guterres and others is the way of the future. And there, the technical sort of changes are a lot quicker than physical connectivity. So as we talked about physical connectivity, I think digital should be at least as important, if not more important. And just look at things that we were able to do in Ukraine with Starlink. I mean, a satellite-based system internet. So the whole idea of getting cables across Caspian, all that are important, but that's the future. That's what CAMCA should focus on as much, if not more. And that's where Europe and Asia can play a lot stronger role, unlimited.
From my end, I would like to add again that, like, I think we as a companies need to invest more and more into the infrastructure. And as I mentioned before, we need deep support. We need for Georgian Railroad and Azeri Railroad to be able to handle more goods. And I think this route will be one of the best in the region.
I think the recent issues actually showed how the Central Asian markets is quite important for the global markets in terms of stabilizing the prices. I mean, any kind of disruptions that have been happening right now, I mean, there is a potential of, certain, like in terms of gas, oil, to at least stabilize the prices, increase the production. But because there is no any access to the global markets, it's impossible to do so. And I hope that our major customers are the European Union, and with their support and with the cooperation of these global markets, we can just upgrade the current infrastructure and actually do this connectivity that we have been talking. And one more comment, I just wanted to comment on Uluk's comment about Kyrgyz-Kazakhstan border. So it's very pity and that we are making discomfort for our Kyrgyz friends with this border. But hope this will not happen. And one more stuff is about this 400-kilometer Kyrgyzstan-China railway. It's quite costly to build such a railway, for example. I mean, and given that it's a mountainous area, and plus building you have to build a super structure of these goods-changing systems between, again, Kyrgyzstan and China. So it's quite a costly infrastructure project. So I hope that it might be possible in the future.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a mother of all topics, it seems to me, for this region, and it's created by nature itself, not just by politics. What strikes me is, on the one hand, how much is happening. There is a lot buzzing around in every area of transport and connectivity. There's a lot happening. No one's mentioned the plan for a digital TAPI. That's actually pretty specific at this point. There are a lot of initiatives, but they tend to be isolated from one another. What is amazing is the lack of region-wide institutions where these issues can be addressed. Now, absent that, you are left totally in the hands of perfectly worthy groups like the International Road Transport Operation in Europe. They're really good, and they're all the CAMCA countries have joined, including, by the way, Afghanistan is still a member. But on the other hand, there are no indigenous groups that function comprehensively in terms of connectivity. This, it seems to me, is the great retardant. It's holding everything back. Yes, people meet, and you have these meetings of very ad hoc for specific areas, railroads, so on, so on, so on. There's no one discussing, let alone monitoring and providing information. The International Road Transport people can tell you how many hours it takes to get from this to this anywhere in the world right now. Anywhere in the world. No one in Central Asia, the Caucasus, Afghanistan, Mongolia can generate that kind of internal information within the region. It's just not there. Okay, there's a big missing element, and it's due to your mutual isolation from each other. And the second missing element is that there's no one in the private sector. Where have the chambers of commerce? I've met with chambers of commerce in most countries of this region, including, by the way, in Afghanistan. These are really bright people. Many of you are intimately involved on the local basis. Where has been the region-wide meetings of the chambers of commerce on transport, connectivity, and so on, logistics? Hasn't happened. So you know, don't lose sight of the fact that there are things that can be done immediately by you that will move the ball. And if there was more regional connectivity on these issues, connectivity about connectivity, if there was more of that, believe me, the advances would be much quicker and more efficient. So I want to thank you all. Really interesting presentations. I apologize to several of you whose questions.
No gender balance.
Oh my goodness, we better have one more question. One more question, come on.
Good finally, gender hard word. Well, I'm coming from Armenia, and it's a landlocked country, and I was listening, thank you. And I was listening to conversations that basically the South Caucasus, talking about South Caucasus, probably I should remind ourselves that Armenia is also a country in the South Caucasus, and we do not see Armenia in the connectivity issues anywhere. So my question is probably to Ambassador Bryza and Dr. Arha, because... Thank you. Because of the positions that you had with the government. So for years, Armenia has been striving to enhance its democratic institutions, to create a democracy, and Armenia is a young and fragile democracy as we see today, but we're there and we're very proud of it. But I have a dilemma, and this is a genuine thing, and it's probably my question is about the oldest dilemma in the world. We see that in the region, the economic interests to some extent are prevailing over the democracy building and human rights. So all of the projects of the connectivity that we see in the region, Caucasus, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, 3 countries, Armenia is not there. So what would be your perspective, or given your experience, how we can truly make this a regional project? Because most of these are sovereign decisions, and from sovereign countries, not only internally and externally.
May I make a suggestion how we address this, since we're done with time, and that is at lunch. Maybe the 2 of you from Armenia could convene the other fellows from the Caucasus and sit down and discuss it. Can we make sure there's a table designated for this purpose, and a big table, so that people from Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Armenia, maybe for the first time in recent history, can sit down and really talk as friends?
We talk very frequently.
I mean as a group, all 3. We'll set up the lunch.
Can I have 30 seconds though?
Yes.
30 seconds? So I think you're right. And in the private sector, there's a lot going on to try to bring Armenia in. There needs to be normalization between Turkey, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, Armenia, and that's a domestic political problem in Armenia, right? When Pashinyan is considered to be a traitor because he wants to rebuild the economic ties and bring Armenia in, it's difficult. He's going to prevail, though, I think. We'll talk about it over lunch. He won the parliamentary elections. You Armenians made your choice. Think about organized industrial zones stretching from Kurik and Aktau through Azerbaijan to Armenia. And how about an organized industrial zone, maybe for renewable energy, in that one piece of territory where you could draw the line to intersect Azerbaijani territory, Nakhchivan, Armenian territory in Sinuk, and then southeastern Turkey. Thank you.
One final note, and that is perhaps you from the 3 Caucasus countries might find a way, informally, totally unofficially, with no agenda, and do it in Georgia, and do it in the countryside, and do it in some place where there's good food and drink, which is anywhere in Georgia. get together, a group of you. Maybe just 6, 2 from each country, or maybe 5 from each country. Sit down, spend a weekend together with no agenda, and see what happens. I'll bet something amazing occurs. Thank you.